Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Market, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet Magazine. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to share with you what's occurring in the fleet industry as of the week of May 18th, based on my discussions with fleet managers and fleet suppliers. Now, during the course of a week, we discussed many different topics, but there appears to be two areas that are uppermost in the minds of most fleet professionals. First is the status of new vehicle production, and second is the state of the wholesale used vehicle market, in particular, the direction that resale prices are trending for out-of-service fleet vehicles. So let's start this discussion by examining what's going on with new vehicle production. Here the outlook is pretty positive. More and more assembly plants are restarting production. Currently there are 28 assembly plants in the U.S. that are either open or just starting to open. And effective today, May 18th, General Motors, Ford, and FCA have gradually started restarting their North American assembly plants. There are still 4 assembly plants that continue to remain closed, but the anticipation is that most of these will reopen in the next several weeks. So overall, the fleet industry consensus is that the ramp-up speed for new vehicle production in the U.S. will be pretty much contingent upon the performance of the supply chain partners, which includes Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 suppliers. We've already seen some examples of how parts constraints have impacted the reopening of automotive assembly plants in recent weeks. One example is the Subaru assembly plant in Lafayette, Indiana, which opened earlier in May but had to temporarily suspend production due to parts constraints and is scheduled to resume production on May 18th. And another example is the Mercedes-Benz assembly plant in Vance, Alabama, which does have the distinction of being the first assembly plant to reopen on April 27th, but has since temporarily suspended production due to part shortages. So 8 weeks earlier, when the OEMs closed their assembly plants, so too did the suppliers suspend their production. And now that the OEMs are restarting production, so too is the supply chain. But as with any chain, it's only as strong as its weakest link. And there is a potential for any one of these weak links to create potential parts constraints. Another key factor is that many components used in U.S. assembly plants are imported from plants in Mexico, which is currently in the midst of its own COVID-19 health crisis. The Mexican government said it would allow the reopening of these plants on May 18th, contingent upon them successfully implementing required safety protocols to protect their workers. While it's still too early to forecast when auto industry volumes will ultimately return to pre-coronavirus production levels, the feeling is that it's going to largely be determined by the OEM supply chain, how quickly they ramp up their production, and future consumer demand. So the next area that I like to examine is what's occurring in the wholesale used vehicle market, and I like to do so from two perspectives. The first is from the perspective of auctions, the primary venue to remarket fleet vehicles, and the second is from the perspective of independent used vehicle dealers, which are not only the primary buyers of fleet vehicles at auction, but they're also the primary sellers of fleet vehicles in the retail market. So let's first examine what's happening with auctions. Since COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic, most physical auctions have closed, and most used vehicles now are remarketed at auction using an online bidding platform. But in the past couple weeks, we've seen some positive signs emerging out of the auction industry. But again, realistically, there's still a long way to go before we start reaching the levels that existed prior to the pandemic. So returning to these positive signs, what we're seeing is, from an auction perspective, an increase in vehicle consignments. Likewise, conversion rates are up, which is the actual number of vehicles that are sold at auction, and dealer attendance on online remarketing platforms, which is up, which creates more competitive and dynamic bidding, so good for all parties. These factors show that the industry is trending in the right direction, but residual value retentions for most fleet vehicles continue to be down. In my opinion, we need to open the physical auctions and unlock the energy that's found in the in-lane bidding to obtain true fair market values for fleet vehicles. And it's the independent auctions who are leading the way in opening up their physical auctions. A growing number of independent auctions have said that they will reopen their in-lane sales the week of June 1. For those auctions that have already opened up their in-lane bidding, they've implemented strict safety guidelines, such as actually inviting law enforcement onto their premises to enforce social distancing, and they're placing stickers on the floor to show the appropriate social distancing, similar to what we've seen at banks or grocery stores, and they're requiring dealers and auction staff to wear masks. So in addition, there's also a growing number of auctions that have now launched what they're calling soft openings of their physical auctions, where they allow dealers on auction property to conduct vehicle inspections of units that are scheduled to be sold online in the next day or two. These are all positive signs that will ultimately lead to the reopening of physical auctions, which in my opinion is crucial to obtaining stronger bidding for fleet vehicles. And the last area that I like to discuss is the examination of what's happening with independent used vehicle dealers. As I mentioned earlier, they play an important role since they are the top buyers of used fleet vehicles at auction, and they are also the primary outlet for selling used fleet vehicles to retail buyers. And last week, the National Independent Automobile Dealers Association, NIADA, released a very important survey of its used vehicle members that it conducted between May 9th through 14th. And it found that almost 2/3 of the dealerships that had furloughed or laid off staff a month earlier are now in the process of bringing these employees back to work. However, and get this, 31% of these furloughed employees are reluctant to return to work, and the reason they're reluctant is because they're making more money from their government-enhanced unemployment benefits than they made on their job. In other words, they're making more money not working than they could working. And this has a short-term potential to create labor constraints, since the NIADA survey showed that 8 out of 10 independent used vehicle dealers are either open for walk-in business or business by appointment. And the majority of these dealers have been able to take advantage of the payroll protection plan that's allowed them to keep their doors open. Today, about 11% of the independent dealers are still temporarily closed, but more importantly, only 1% of them have said that they've permanently closed their auction business. But unfortunately, being open for business doesn't mean that used vehicle buyers have returned. Retail sales at independent dealers continue to be down, and they're down substantially. Half of the dealers say that their business is down by 50% or more when compared to same time last year. In order for this recovery to be successful, it's critical to bring consumers back into dealerships, but many of these potential buyers still have concerns about their personal finances or concerns about contracting the virus. Another big unknown is what will happen when consumer buying demands after the government relief packages start to expire. And it's something to think about. So this concludes my State of the Fleet Industry for the week of May 18th. I want to thank you for listening, and until we meet again, I like to say stay safe and stay informed. Thank you very much.